This is, without doubt, one of the most bizarre homicides that I'm aware of or have worked on. It is skin-crawling, chillingly cold, calculated murder.
Have you ever felt envy or jealousy toward a friend? Perhaps their looks, relationships, or personality was something you pined after. What did you do? Back away from them? Or even sabotage them? Either way, I'm sure you didn't do what Caroline Reed Robertson did. Back in 1999, the city of Melbourne was stunned by the revelation of Caroline's unsettling 5-year-long plan, which was particularly shocking for a 19-year-old girl. Her despicable plan was fueled by a disturbing mix of jealousy, lust, and self-hatred. Let's dive into the jealous girl who killed her prettiest friend to steal her face. Rachel Barber was born on September 12, 1983, to parents Michael and Elizabeth. She grew up in Melbourne, Australia, along with her 2 younger sisters, Ashley and Heather.
Happy Christmas, Rachel!
Unexpectedly, Rachel belonged to a large and joyful family, but it was even more special because they were all passionate artists. Within her family, there was a designer, a toy maker, a children's author, and a virtual artist. As one might expect, she developed a strong affinity for the arts from a very early age.
Her home was full of love and joy, and she was happy, outgoing, athletic. Ballet was her life.
Her strongest passion was ballet dancing.
Ballet was always her first passion, and Rachel would come home at the end of the day and our whole house would be dismantled, and I just accepted that. And she'd get all her dress-ups out and she would just improvise, and there would be full-on performances.
Rachel loved choreographing dances for her younger sisters as the stars in. From her early days in primary school, she held a strong belief that dancing would become her career, and her family never doubted her aspirations. After all, Elizabeth would play classical music to Rachel when she was still in the womb. And with ballet, work really does start early. Rachel started her ballet classes at the Melbourne Dance Academy when she was about 6 years old, and she never gave up her dream. By the time she started high school, she was a prolific junior dancer, and she was also enrolled in a modeling course. When she was 14, she appeared in women's fitness magazines. But around the same time, Rachel started having a difficult conversation with her parents. She wanted to drop out of school so that she could attend the dance factory full-time. So, by the end of her freshman year in 1998, Rachel transferred to the dance factory. It was her dream come true. The dance factory is also where Rachel met her first ever boyfriend, Manny Carella. The two quickly progressed from best friends to lovers based on their shared passions. Although Rachel appeared to be the life of the party, she was actually quite shy when she was out in the public. But whenever she was surrounded by her friends, she would shine. Sadly, her light would stop shining all too soon. On March 1st, 1999, Rachel's day started just like any other. Around 9 a.m., she kissed her mom goodbye and got in the car with her dad.
She waited for her father, and then she was fine, and then they went off and she waved goodbye. She said, "I love you" at the end, and that was the morning.
He would take her to the Riverside Road and Elgar Road tram station, where she would get on the tram to her friend's house. Her friend's house in Richmond was a sort of hub where all the dance students would meet up and have breakfast before heading to the dance factory together.
I'm gonna put my makeup on.
That morning, Rachel hugged everyone, including her boyfriend. She also gave Manny a gift, a little purple heart with a ribbon on it. That morning, she was particularly excited. She told her dance friends that she was going to make a lot of money that day. She didn't tell them how, as it was a surprise. So after the dance classes were over at 5:30 p.m., Rachel and her friends started walking toward the tram station on Church Street. But when they stopped there, Rachel said that day she was going to take a different tram. So she kissed Manny goodbye and walked to the Waltham station. She would take the tram in the opposite direction of her home, to meet an old friend at her flat. But at 6:30 p.m. that day, Elizabeth started to get worried about her daughter. She was making dinner with Rachel's younger sisters while she was waiting for Michael and Rachel to come home. As per usual, Michael was supposed to pick Rachel up from the local tram station at 6 or 6:15, but time flew by and there was no sign of them.
When did you start to feel something was wrong?
I knew instantly. I knew, because I just had that gut feeling, because it wasn't Rachel. Rachel wasn't someone to just disappear. There's no way that she'd want to run away or anything like that. It just wasn't her. So my instinct was she was dead that night.
7 turned to 7:40. At first, Michael wasn't answering his phone. Then Elizabeth got a distressing phone call. Michael was in Blackburn at his parents' house. He didn't find Rachel at the tram stop, nor was she answering her phone. He asked Elizabeth if Rachel had gone home on her own, but she hadn't.
When Michael rang me up and said Rachel wasn't at the tram stop, I was panicking. And you think, why panic? She's 15, but we knew something was wrong because she wasn't home.
Michael had checked all the local tram stops, and now he was checking his family's in desperation. Rachel was nowhere to be found, so her parents immediately contacted the media. They showed Rachel's face on missing posters and urged people to come forward with any relevant information. Rachel was afraid of being out on her own, and she was also afraid of the dark. In the past, Rachel had encountered a few incidents where strange men followed her into shops, leading her to become very cautious. To ensure her safety, Michael would still drive her to the tram stop every morning. Knowing Rachel's careful nature, the Barber family was certain that she hadn't just run away. However, when they reported her missing to the police, the officers brushed it off completely, chalking it up to teenage rebellion. But Elizabeth was determined to resolve the case and began reaching out to Rachel's friends, starting with Manny, who was usually aware of everything Rachel was involved in. Indeed, Manny gave Elizabeth a little clue into Rachel's last hours. He said, "Oh, I thought she wouldn't go." Elizabeth asked, "Where?" So Manny told her about the old girlfriend Rachel said she was meeting for a quick cash-earning job. Then Elizabeth remembered. A few months back, Rachel's former neighbor and babysitter, Caroline, contacted her, offering a modeling job that could earn her a hefty sum of money. But when Rachel told her mom about it, she said no. She was too young to take these kinds of gigs. So on February 28th, Caroline tried again, but made sure Rachel kept this job a secret from her mom. But Mother's intuition came through, and on the morning of March 1st, Elizabeth had a strange feeling in her gut.
I said, "You're up to something." I said, "What are you up to?" And it was almost there. And she said nothing.
Rachel could have talked to her mom right there and then. That would have saved her life. Tragically, it was her trust in people and overall kindness that led Rachel to her horrible death. No one knew where this modeling job was located. They just knew she went the opposite way of home on the tram. As the police remained reluctant to help, on the evening of March 1st, Elizabeth and Michael drove around Melbourne asking people if they'd seen their daughter. Sadly, no one had. The next morning, Rachel's parents walked into the police station once more. This time, they had a stack of photos of their daughter. But when they spoke to the officer on duty, they found out he hadn't even been told about a missing persons report. Michael and Elizabeth took on the role of investigators as they went to the dance factory to look through Rachel's locker for clues. After finding nothing relevant, they visited Rachel's favorite shoe store. Everyone knew she had her eye on a pair that she could not afford, so her parents asked the shop attendant if she had purchased them. The attendant informed them that Rachel asked for the shoes to be kept aside so she could buy them the next day. However, she never came back for them. As they showed Rachel's picture to other shop assistants, they received distressing information. There was a recently released convicted felon in the area running an illegal brothel. Even more concerning was the felon's history of exploiting young girls for illegal street work. According to a shop assistant, Rachel was approached by one of the brothel's crew with an offer to join them, promising significant earnings. However, Rachel declined. Rachel's parents felt a sense of dread as the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit together. Rachel had mentioned making money without disclosing how, and now they learned about the felon seeking teenagers. This led them to believe that the brothel might be a place to investigate further. When they contacted the brothel to inquire about Rachel's involvement, the responses they received were confusing to say the least. The brothel said, first of all, they never recruit people off the streets, and second of all, Rachel had never come in contact with them. What had that shop assistant seen? Why was he lying? The search for answers only generated more questions as Elizabeth and Michael persisted in their efforts. On the evening of March 2nd, they went to the Richmond police station, hoping for more cooperative officers. They were told that Rachel's missing person case had already been filed at the Box Hill office, preventing a separate investigation at the Richmond station due to bureaucratic constraints. And when they called Melbourne hospitals, asking if they had a patient called Rachel Barber, the hospitals said they couldn't give out private information to random callers. Imagine how infuriating all of this must feel for Rachel's family. By March 3rd, all of Rachel's loved ones started filing reports to their nearest stations, thinking it would force the police to help. However, it made things worse. On March 4th, the police did do something, but it was incredibly stupid. Their theory was that Rachel had gotten pregnant, so she ran away, or that Manny, who got her pregnant, got mad and took her life. So they took Manny in for questioning, but it was pretty clear Manny wasn't with Rachel at the time of her disappearance. And when the police spoke to Rachel's family, they assured them Rachel would tell them if she was pregnant. Later that day, a witness said she saw Rachel with 2 other girls at East Richmond Station. The police checked the CCTV, and that was not Rachel. Then another witness said she saw Rachel 3 days after her disappearance with a blonde-haired man. The police didn't check this one though. They just said they solved the case. Rachel was a typical teenage runaway. Once again, the Barbers had to insist this was unlike their daughter. The police really had to do their jobs. So, an officer came to their house and looked through Rachel's room. He concluded that Rachel had run off and advised her parents to go to counseling and focus on their other 2 daughters. Honestly, how can a police officer say this to a family who doesn't know where their daughter is? It gets even more outrageous. As Rachel's parents made a list of suspicious individuals in their close circle, they thought of a creepy guy in their neighborhood. This was a man who Elizabeth often caught creeping around their house and talking to her girls. Just 2 weeks before Rachel's disappearance, Elizabeth was just walking out of the shower when she found this man inside their house, talking to her youngest daughters. She kicked him out of the house, told him to never return, and reported him to the police. On March 6th, Elizabeth and Michael went to the Box Hill police station and inquired about this man. So the officers told them to find another place to go, as that had wasted enough of their time already. Wait, what? Elizabeth broke down crying and was giving up hope on the police. But later that day, someone called her. It was Allison, the older sister of one of Rachel's friends. She found out that Rachel was missing, and she thought she'd share a little detail she remembered from March 1st. She'd seen Rachel at Prahran Tran Station with another girl. She was a little bit older than her, but look-wise, nothing else stood out. So they took Allison and went over to the police station, where Allison drew a sketch of the girl she'd seen with Rachel. The Barber family also made a public appeal.
She's gone somewhere that she thought was legit. It's my gut feeling.
We want Rachel back. She's missed. We love her.
Soon enough, Australia's Most Wanted featured Rachel in their magazine, and Allison's sketch was shown to the public. But the Barbers couldn't identify who it was from Allison's sketch. Still, it was a familiar face. In fact, it was an all too familiar face that the Barbers had known for almost a decade. Caroline Reed Robertson. The Robertsons became the Barbers' neighbors back in 1992. There were a few odd similarities between the 2 families. Both had 3 daughters, and Caroline and Rachel were the eldest. They lived across the street from each other, so it sounds like the 6 girls would have been the best of friends. But it was nothing like that. When you actually looked inside the homes, the families were nothing like each other.
On the face of it, Caroline was fine. She had a quiet personality. But what happens inside her house is often not seen outside of the house.
Caroline's parents fought every single day. And on top of that, Caroline was not the most confident. She was overweight. Her skin was going through that awful teenage phase, and her family was seriously stressful. But every time she looked out her window, she saw an idyllic family and a happy, beautiful girl called Rachel.
She clearly saw Rachel as the ideal person, as the person she wanted.
Yeah, and this is the whole silly thing, because if Rachel had been told that Caroline saw her as a perfect person, Rachel would have laughed about that herself. Because nobody's perfect, and Rachel wasn't perfect.
The first time Caroline met Rachel in person, she was 15, and Rachel was 10. Rachel's family had hired her to babysit their girls while they were out. What could go wrong? If anything, they expected the Barber girls to love Caroline. But they didn't foresee Caroline's creepy obsession. She couldn't get Rachel out of her head. She found her very attractive, but she hated that she was everything she wasn't.
And I think that Caroline was very unhappy with herself. She didn't like the way she looked. She did want to take on that persona of someone that was happy, that was beautiful, that was popular, like Rachel was.
Indeed, Caroline didn't just want to be around Rachel. She wanted to be Rachel, steal her identity, and become her in every way imaginable.
You and I can sit here and say, well, that's just not possible. But certainly that's what she wanted to do, and that is absolutely my belief of why she took Rachel's life.
To steal Rachel's identity, she would have to kill her.
Some people might change their behaviour, their appearance, their job, their lifestyle, so they can be like their role model. But to actually want to kill the role model and replace them I mean, that's going really a long way.
Caroline's horrific plan began the first time she met Rachel. That's right. For 5 long years, Caroline planned Rachel's murder. In her head, she could simply take her life and become her. This is what Caroline wrote in her diary.
I don't fit anywhere in this crazy world because I am ugly.
Caroline's mother, Gail, was desperate. She saw her daughter in the terrible mental state she was in, and she even asked Elizabeth for advice.
I had Gail crying on my shoulder. My clothes were saturated with Gail's tears for her grief over worry for her daughter. And she said, I can't do anything. I'd say, take her to see somebody. And she said, I've tried that. She doesn't want to go.
If only the mothers knew what was going on inside Caroline's mind, but she kept her thoughts to herself. The only proof were her diaries, full of nasty expressions like obese pizza face that she would use to describe herself.
Rachel is strikingly attractive. Dancer's body, very clear, pale skin, hypnotic green eyes, wild, free spirit, passionate, charming, moody, mysterious.
Well, sometimes you start off with a process of fantasizing, and then, that compulsion becomes stronger and stronger. And then if you don't start acting on it, then you just feel this terrible discomfort. And that's what motivates people to do things that they shouldn't be doing.
Still, the Barbers were unaware of her horrible obsession.
We were living our lives, they were living theirs. So we were oblivious to anything that Caroline could have been planning. Rachel would have been spied on quite a few times because she was keeping an eye on Rachel a lot.
Caroline spent all her free time prying on Rachel, finding photos of her and putting them on her walls. Once, she convinced Rachel to let her photograph her for a school project. These photos were added to her creepy collection.
That's scary. I mean, that's scary that, she had photos of all of us girls all over her walls. I mean, that's crazy.
But in 1998, Caroline's fantasy seemed to come to a bitter end. The Barbers moved house.
When Rachel was 14, the Barbers moved to the outer Melbourne suburb of Heathmont. The family thought they'd seen the last of their strange neighbour.
As far as the Barbers were concerned, this was the end of their daughter's odd little friendship with Caroline Robertson. But as far as Caroline was concerned, this was just the beginning of her plan. As soon as Caroline graduated from high school, she moved to a rented apartment in Proven. She didn't get a job or apply to university. Her whole time was dedicated to planning how to kill Rachel.
She was thinking about this for a couple of years, or even if she wasn't thinking about it, it was in her subconscious. One of the homicide detectives sadly said that he really honestly believed Rachel's days were numbered.
By 1999, Caroline didn't have any sense left. She truly thought killing Rachel would allow her to replace her.
With people who lack conscience, they will see the victim as someone who, by their own fault, is in the wrong place at the wrong time and deserve what they get. If you're that naive and you fall for my trap, then that's your fault. This is the kind of logic that I've heard over and over.
This is why Caroline has no remorse for what she did. On March 1st, 1999, she convinced Rachel to take a modeling job for $100. Because she'd tried it in January too, and Rachel's mom opposed the idea, this time she made Rachel promise she wouldn't tell anyone about the job. So after her dance class, Rachel headed over to Promen tram station, where she met Caroline. She invited Rachel into her flat to do a few yoga relaxation poses, then her from behind.
Back at her unit, Caroline put Rachel at ease. She showed her some relaxation exercises. Then she attacked, choking Rachel with a computer cable.
Rachel had no idea why Caroline wanted to take her life. She had never suspected her. Just like the rest of the Barber family, she saw Caroline as a quiet, maybe odd girl. Her obsession had been a secret up until this point. Now that Caroline had done what she imagined for the last 5 years, but she didn't have a plan on what to do next. After Allison gave the police her sketch of Caroline, the investigators tracked Rachel's last phone calls on the day of March 1st. When 2 of them matched a phone number from Proven, they knew that was their suspect. Soon enough, they identified the phone number as Caroline Reed Robertson's.
At that point, very cruelly so, Michael actually believed that she was alive. And He thought for whatever reason whatever reason, Rachel was with Caroline, but the important thing would be that she would be alive, that she hadn't been kidnapped, that she hadn't been raped. All the dreadful things that you could possibly ever imagine happened to your daughter, we had visualised.
A week after Rachel went missing, the police went to Caroline's house. In the end, they had to break in as she did not open up. They found her unconscious on the floor after she'd had an epileptic seizure. Rachel, however, was nowhere to be found, so the officers rushed Caroline to the hospital. 2 hours later, she was awake. If you still didn't think Caroline was a psychopathic killer, listen to what she told the first cop who interviewed her.
I asked her where Rachel was, and she responded to me that Rachel was dead. And that surprised me. And I said, you know, are you sure she's dead? And she said, yes, I've buried her. And I said, listen, are you sure? Are you sure that she's dead? Is there no way we can help her? And she told me that she'd buried Rachel on a family country property near where she'd buried other pets.
Caroline didn't show any emotion whatsoever. No remorse, guilt, or even fear that she would be going to prison. The police had more than a confession from Caroline. Her flat was filled with pictures of Rachel, and inside her diary was a carefully designed plan to kill her and steal her identity. She even had a copy of her birth certificate. She had been planning this for 5 years, and the officers could see it clearly for the first time.
There is evidence of planning. Caroline clearly planned this out. This was a premeditated murder.
70 kilometers away from Melbourne, the police officers found Caroline's countryside family home. Rachel's body was buried in a shallow grave in a wooded area. It was very badly decomposed.
Neil sat in front of us and he said, there's no other way of saying this. Rachel's been murdered.
When the officers revealed the murderer, the family wasn't surprised.
I was shocked, but not surprised, really, in any way.
But for the police, this was just a twist in the case. The story was far from over.
You've gone from missing person to murder.
Yes, absolutely.
They took Caroline from the hospital to the police station and proceeded to interrogate her, but she wouldn't say anything.
Caroline's very cold. Very matter of fact, but just very cold. There's no emotion there whatsoever.
Caroline pretended to be unaware of the murder and remained silent in order to somehow get a lighter sentence. However, Caroline's diary and Rachel's remains were enough to convict her on the first degree. The evil nature of this plan was so clear that by March 13th, Caroline was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In 2015, Caroline Reed Robertson was released on parole at the age of 35. When Elizabeth saw a picture of her today, she noticed how eerily it is that Caroline looks a bit like Rachel now.
There is a Rachel likeness there, the eyes. I kept thinking she looks like someone I know. I thought, bloody hell. It has that feel about Rachel, at first glance. It's kind of weird. Everything is different, but she still has that look.
Caroline has been in a long-term relationship with a former prisoner called Annette Taylor, and it seems like she turned her life around. However, there's no trusting someone as cold and calculated like that. For the Barber family, Rachel's tragic story will never be forgotten. Still, they choose to stay strong and remember the good side of things.
When Rachel was murdered, her life couldn't have been better. And she was at a point where she totally believed in herself. She was doing her dancing and everything was going to be right for her.
I've got to go now. Sorry, goodbye.
Thanks for watching Crime City. See you on the next one.